So today we'll be talking about mindfulness of thoughts and perceptions. Sometimes it's referred to as just mindfulness of mind or mental activity. And this is the third foundation of mindfulness. And I just want to recall the traditional illustration I shared last week in our class of our mind being like a fist. And when something is unpleasant, we grasp and try to cling to often what is no longer here or not yet here. And when it's unpleasant, we resist or push away and somehow try to keep out what is already here. And this causes a great amount of unnecessary dissatisfaction and suffering in our life. So, this practice is about relaxing the hand of our mind and beginning to sense what it's like when the hand of our mind is open rather than making a fist trying to cling to or push something away. And so we have mindfulness of the body, and we have mindfulness of the feeling tones of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. And then we also have this other sense that appears in our awareness, and this is all the stuff of mind, such as thoughts, perceptions, moods, emotional or mental states. And I know we don't tend to experience these as things that are appearing in our awareness. We tend to immediately identify with whatever appears. And this kind of leaves us unable to see it clearly. But actually, we can be aware of these things appearing in our mind, just the same as we can be aware of the sensations in our body or other objects around us or other people. We can also become aware of what's going on in our mind. So when we practice mindfulness of our mind or mindfulness of thoughts, we are acknowledging what appears in our mind rather than allowing it to immediately take control over us. And so there is an expression I'm going to drop right now, and I want it to be the kind of through line for the whole talk. And it's just that thoughts think themselves. Thoughts think themselves. And this will be the theme throughout. It may not make conceptual sense to you yet, but hopefully it will by the end of me talking about this, and hopefully even more so as you apply it in your own life. But as I've said in previous sessions, it's not about the concepts or what I say. These are only a tool to provide guidance. It is really in you applying this practice to your own life where the truth of what is shared here can be revealed. So thoughts think themselves. Unlike any other species, we, as humans, we spend a large portion of our formative years in a developmental process, downloading language and our capacity to tell stories and to understand them. But once downloaded, language and story mode doesn't come with an off switch. So even when we aren't speaking or talking, our brain continues to secrete language in the form of thoughts. Our mind secretes thoughts in the same way that our mouth produces saliva or sweat glands produce sweat, or how our body is always breathing. But just like we rarely notice the body breathing, we rarely notice that our minds are thinking. And we're totally caught up in whatever story is being spun. The poet Muriel Rukeyser, I hope I'm getting that pronunciation right, wrote that the universe is made of stories, not atoms. So this is not a bad thing that our minds are thinking. This is just what minds do. And we don't have to feel guilty about it, and we don't have to judge ourselves for it. Just like salivating or the sweating or the breathing, we don't pass judgment on this process taking place. Our mind is just producing thoughts, and we don't have to pass judgment on these either. But we don't tend to live this way. We tend to live very caught up in the inner story and narrative that we spin, often spending the majority of our lives lost in thoughts about remembering the past or planning for the future, judging ourselves or others, worrying, carrying out entire arguments and conversations. We can often become our own worst critics. And we get pretty good about criticizing and judging others while we're at it too. One of the traditional principles in this practice is that our thoughts are often one-sided and untrue. We get caught in the narrative of, they said, I'm not, they didn't, I am, they are, I never, they don't, they'll never. And this creates a deep sense of disconnection and separation, causing us to feel cut off from ourselves and those around us. One teacher says, we must admit that very often we are afraid or ashamed to look at our own minds, so we prefer to avoid it. So our thoughts can overtake us and start to control us. We don't tend to be aware that we are caught up in thoughts. Instead, we tend to feel like our thoughts really are us. But if that were the case and we really were in control of our thoughts, try telling them to turn off. Try flipping the off switch for your thoughts. So thoughts think themselves. And just like the body breathing or the mouth salivating all on its own, your mind produces thoughts all on its own. And the truth is that for most of our lives, these thoughts are controlling us. There is a story of a mindfulness practitioner on a summer meditation retreat at a camp in the redwoods. And just so you know, on some retreats, you could be all alone off in a hut in the wilderness by yourself. I've done a silent retreat and I was alone, but not in a hut in the wilderness. So just know that's the context for this story, for this meditation practitioner. She's on a retreat alone in the redwoods, and in the middle of the night, she wakes up startled by the sound of a loud bear growl just outside. She frantically finds the flashlight and stays quiet and still, waiting for the bear to make another noise or growl again. And at first, it was dead silent. And then after another minute passed, her tummy let out a loud growl, and she realized that the bean soup she'd eaten for dinner was having its way in her digestive tract. The loud growl was herself. So our thoughts are often controlling us, and we aren't even aware they are there. But with mindfulness, we can practice stepping out of story mode and into this space of mindful awareness where we find freedom from the continuous hijacking by our thoughts. And instead, we can observe them. This can reveal how untrue the stories we tell ourselves really are much of the time. Many people tend to think that meditation is about emptying your mind of thoughts. But this is really a big misconception, particularly when it comes to mindfulness practice. There might be some moments where the mind gets quiet, and for some people, this can be pleasant. For others, it can be uncomfortable if we aren't used to experiencing our mind being so quiet. But the point of mindfulness meditation is not to stop thoughts from happening or keep them out by somehow figuring out the off switch. The point is rather to unhook ourselves from the control that thoughts have over us much of the time. When we practice mindfulness, we see that thoughts come and go on their own. There's no one who needs to be doing the thinking. The thoughts just appear on their own, and we either become aware that the thought is present and let it pass by, or we get hooked onto the thought, causing us to struggle and suffer. And there's a little analogy I have for this in my mind I've never really shared, but if you've ever gone fishing or been looking at a fish in the water, you can sometimes see them swimming at just enough pace where the current's coming downstream at them and they look like they're swimming in place, like they're not moving forward at all. It looks still, and the water's coming downstream and they're swimming just enough to stay in place. And so I kind of imagine this scenario as like the fish is our attention, and thoughts are like these hooks with bait on them that appear in the water and they float down the stream. And as long as the fish doesn't take the bait and get hooked, there's no problem with the hook floating right on by. But if a hook gets in the water and the fish decides to take the bait and latches on, then the hook grips the fish and a struggle begins to take place. So when we practice mindfulness meditation, we are actively practicing detaching ourselves or unhooking from whatever has us caught. So we can take our thoughts as an object of meditation, not just seeing the bait and taking the bait, but being aware that the bait is attached to a hook and letting the hook float by us. When we become aware of something, we see that we are not the thing that we are aware of. When we aren't aware that a thought is there, we become the thought. But when we know the thought is present and observe the thought with mindfulness, we can let it pass through our awareness and we don't become the thought. Like I mentioned in the last class, our role is not being a judge, but a scientist. And so when we observe our thoughts as though they were under a microscope, we study thoughts as the object of our meditation. And this helps us to see that we are not simply our thoughts, and that thoughts think themselves. So the quote unquote goal is not to stop thoughts or control thoughts, but ceasing to be caught by the hook of thoughts as they arise, allowing them to float through our awareness and pass us by. And this is why establishing an anchor and grounding our attention in the body is so helpful in our meditation practice, because it allows our mind to stay present and grounded, able to recognize when we've taken the bait and gotten hooked by a thought. But I always want to recall to mind, help us remember that the map is not the territory. The map is not the territory. And all I mean by that is that the real teacher here is not me and what I'm sharing, but in your application of this practice in your own life.